Hello, and welcome to our presentation regarding clean water and sanitation as we appeal to the United Nations Committee. Wherever you are joining us from, we thank you for your time and attention while we address our concerns.
As students of York University, we acknowledge our presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. With dignity and respect, we acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. We also recognize the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the current presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people.
To begin, we will discuss the link between clean water, sanitization, and globalization. Threats to drinkable water are one of the most critical environmental challenges, given the connection to health, education, and productivity outcomes. Major globalization factors that affect access to water include free trade and foreign direct investments. Land and natural resource market liberalization were important drivers to worldwide land grabs by transnational corporations and foreign governments, leading to both developing and developed countries to specialize in trading goods that are water-intensive and water-polluting. Increased privatization of water has impacted access to this vital resource, resulting in adverse health issues that significantly affect many lives. Lack of access to safe water, sanitization, and hand hygiene greatly decreases quality of life and life expectancy. Every year, an estimated 1.7 million people are killed by unsafe water. It has been predicted that by 2025, a third of the global population will be unable to access potable water. According to the World Health Organization, approximately 85 million people currently lack basic drinking water services, with many having to rely on contaminated surface water for survival. Water distribution and accessibility have historically been geared towards producing practices such as agriculture, in order to attract capital and compete in international export markets. It has been found that industrialized agriculture is accountable for 92% of global water consumption.
Water stress occurs when the demand for safe, usable water in a given area exceeds the supply. If we look at the demand aspect, roughly 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture, while the rest is divided between industrial and domestic uses. Globalization forces such as marketization and consumerism increase the demand for safe, usable water, while technological advancements reduce the supply. Global marketization and increased consumerism exacerbate water stress experienced in countries who are unable to afford sufficient infrastructure to maintain or increase their water supply. As global marketization of goods increases, global transportation increases. This results in higher energy demands. The production and consumption of globally traded goods also leads to increased energy demands. Coca-Cola, which is a beverage manufacturing industry, annually consumes 2.5 million liters of water for production practices alone. The increased energy demands from both the transportation and production of goods have a huge impact on water supply. Water is required for the extraction of fossil fuels, which is one of the world's greatest sources of energy. The diagram to the left of the page illustrates how we use fossil fuels to generate energy. The volume of water required for the production of a commodity is referred to as virtual water. Virtual water trade is then the volume of water contained in products exchanged internationally. Lastly, we will look at the globalization factor known as technological change. Technological advancements such as fertilizers, irrigation, new crop varieties, and other innovations pollute fresh water, decreasing the globe's water supply.
Moving on to statistics. According to Center of Disease Control and Prevention, today 785 million people, meaning 1 in every 9 person, do not have access to safe drinking water. More than 884 million people did not have safe water to drink at all. 2 billion people lack access to improved sanitization. About 3 billion people worldwide lack adequate facilities to safely wash their hands at home. Every 1 in 3 people do not have access to a toilet. Unsafe drinking water was responsible for 72% of diarrheal deaths, while poor sanitization was responsible for 56% of diarrheal deaths, which makes it the third leading cause of child death. In developing countries, women or girls spend about $266 million collectively every day finding a water source for their families. The economic advantages of universal access to basic water and sanitization would amount to $18.5 billion per year in averted fatalities alone. Billions of dollars is lost economy opportunities are attributed to time spent gathering water or seeking safe sanitization. Every year, $260 billion is lost due to a lack of basic water and sanitization.
There are multiple implications for global health regarding clean water and sanitation. These can be positive, such as global infant mortality rates significantly reducing with improved access to clean water and sanitization practices, or negative, such as contaminating water causing the spread of diseases such as hepatitis A, typhoid, cholera, polio, and others. Water containers can also host vectors such as mosquitoes, which can increase the transmission of malaria and Zika virus. There have been multiple international studies that look to examine how access to clean water and sanitization cut these transmission pathways and prevent disease in the studied areas. An example of an international health initiative to improve access to clean water and sanitization is the Water and Sanitation for Health Facility Improvement Tool, or WASHFIT. This was developed by the World Health Organization in collaboration with UNICEF, with the goal of providing guidance to small primary healthcare facilities, particularly in those low and middle income areas, on ways to continually improve water and sanitization practices through continual assessment on the quality of these factors, and recommended courses of action for improvement in these areas and leading to improved health outcomes in the future. The following example is provided by the World Health Organization and UNICEF as an example to demonstrate the different areas in which water quality is assessed and the assessment rankings given.
Now we will discuss the implications for global health equity. Access to clean water and sanitation is considered a human right and a crucial determinant of health. Despite this, 884 million people globally have inadequate access to clean water in their homes. More specifically, Indigenous communities in Canada face severe health inequities that arise from poor sanitation and lack of access to clean water. In Indigenous cultures, water is considered the heart of the ecosystem. Therefore, having inadequate access to water directly impacts their health and their culture. Indigenous communities around the world are often overlooked and particularly vulnerable to water insecurity. This includes interactions between sanitation, drinking water, and water resources. Indigenous communities are often exposed to toxins and contaminants in their water that lead to negative health outcomes. Water insecurity among these communities is not limited to drinking water quality, but extends to the accessibility to water and the management of waste. Statistics to consider is that more than half of the water on reserves pose medium to high risk of contamination, and also 1 in 5 Indigenous communities are under water advisories which require them to either boil water or not drink it. When discussing water insecurity, it is important to consider an Indigenous people's point of view. Within Indigenous communities, water is seen as the basis of all life. It is the heart of their ecosystem. Elders explain that water is alive and therefore has a living spirit. Therefore, the degradation of water in the environment directly causes deterioration of health and culture. Water is seen as the essence of life, making the direct connection between health, well-being, and water. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act of 1999 says the protection of the environment is essential for Canadians' well-being and demands that they are protected from environmental risks such as poor air quality, hazardous waste, and toxic chemicals. The exposure of all of these things are disproportionately seen in racialized communities such as Indigenous ones. The environment is a provincial responsibility, and healthcare is mandated as a national responsibility, leading to gaps in communication and confusion. Indigenous people cherish their land and water specifically, yet they battle for access to clean water.
An example of a community that suffers from water insecurity is Black Tickle Domino. This community was given a portable drinking water unit that sold water, but it often did not operate properly and was a far distance from the community. This caused high transportation costs that made it difficult to access the unit. The water quality was also at risk to be contaminated, and E. coli was found in the water. This caused gastrointestinal issues to be common. Furthermore, poverty made it difficult for families to afford the cost of the water. Therefore, they consumed high-sugar beverages because they were more accessible and cheaper.
Grassy Narrows has been living with mercury-poisoned water since 1970. The water supplies the basic needs that are vital to their identity and culture, as their main source of food and employment is fish. Mercury is extremely poisonous. When mixed with water, it becomes an organic and lethal substance. When the mercury poisoning occurred, unemployment skyrocketed to 95%, leading to high rates of self-identity crisis, alcoholism, and routine violence. Symptoms of mercury poisoning include impairment of all senses, accelerated body deterioration, long-term neurological deficits, miscarriage, and birth defects. The community is now burdened with the cost of purchasing fish from farther locations, changing their entire diet, contributing to type 2 diabetes, cancer, and thyroid disease never seen before. The government has downplayed the mercury poisoning problem. It is backed by racism, and the government suggests that the symptoms of poisoning displayed are likely the result of alcoholism. The environmental injustice of Grassy Narrows has destroyed Indigenous rights, eliminating their cultural significance of the land and water. Environmental racism mirrors environmental injustice, but the burdened groups are targeted because of their race. These groups are targeted with industrial hazards because the communities living there are unworthy of respect. These claims further support the health inequity of clean drinking water in Indigenous communities, as health officials have continuously found dangerously high levels of mercury in the water, fish supply, and in the bloodwork of local residents, yet racism and prejudice stands in the way of mitigating the issue.
The Canadian government made a promise to eliminate all drinking water advisories by March 2021. We are now 8 months past that deadline at the time of recording. Access to safe drinking water relates to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's Call to Action number 19 to establish measurable goals to identify and close the gaps in health outcomes between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities. According to the Beyond 94 website by CBC News, the federal government has not yet established these goals. Please watch this short video by APTN News.
The Auditor General of Canada says unless significant changes are made in how the federal government works with First Nations to resolve water issues, problems with access to safe drinking water will persist. A new report states Justin Trudeau's government has not provided necessary support to end long-term boil water advisories and address ongoing water issues in communities.
In a country like Canada in 2021, it is hard to believe that there are so many individuals who don't have access to something that many of us take for granted. And hence it is time for Indigenous Services Canada to take some concrete action.
Karen Hogan called the findings disheartening. The report tracks what has been done since 2015, when Trudeau came into power, until late 2020. The Liberals promised to end long-term boil water advisories by March 2021. They have confirmed this will not happen, citing delays due to the pandemic. But the Auditor General found Indigenous Services Canada was not on track to meet this deadline prior to the pandemic. In 2015, there were 160 long-term drinking water advisories. As of November 2020, 100 have been eliminated. However, the report finds 15% of these were resolved due to interim measures.
There are many temporary measures that are put into place, and a temporary measure just pushes the issue a little further down the road. So it is time to find long-term, sustainable solutions for the First Nations communities. While there are some plans in place or under development, those solutions won't be in place until at least 2025.
The audit found the department's efforts have been constrained by an outdated funding formula for operations and management. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller would not give a time frame when the AG's recommendations would be implemented.
I have a very, very specific goal of ensuring that clean water gets in communities. We have to make sure that it's being done in the right way. And I would put to you that we are close to getting there. We are on a good track.
Ultimately, the audit found a regulatory regime was still not in place, 15 years after the AG first recommended it. The report says until this is implemented, First Nations will not have drinking water protections comparable with other communities. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News.
Now we are going to talk about policies, specifically what policies are in place in Ontario. There is currently a Safe Drinking Water Act in 2002. This act provides protection of human health by ensuring safe drinking water and preventing drinking water hazards like microorganisms, arsenic, and other chemicals. Another policy is the Clean Water Act of 2006. The purpose of this act is to protect existing sources of drinking water, such as the Great Lakes. What policies should be introduced in Ontario and nationally across Canada? There should be a policy that entitles all Canadians, including Indigenous communities, to clean drinking water. More specifically, the federal government should act upon the long-standing drinking water hazards and advisories to commit to providing safe and clean drinking water in all Indigenous communities. What policies can be introduced internationally? First, create a policy that all sanitization facilities, including toilets and urinals, must be flushed into a sewer or a safe enclosure system. This policy could promote clean water and sanitization by attempting to end the pollution of waste and microorganisms into our bodies of water, which infect our waters and ultimately cause human illness and disease. Second, develop a policy to monitor and regulate water use. Since most people view water as a limitless source, it is important to monitor water use and create awareness to protect our water resources. Governments could create a separate water tax that could charge people based on the quantity of water used. The tax money could go towards renewing the water to be reused by the entire population. Taxation is an action informed by globalization that would change human behavior onto a more sustainable path.
So, how does nursing play a role in the promotion of global health in regards to clean water and sanitation? Nurses can advocate and lobby to improve this issue by engaging members of the community and exercising their voice to influence practice and policy making. We can help educate patients and community members on clean water and sanitization practices. For example, educating patients who live near an oil mine about water testing and contamination. We can schedule meetings with political leaders and legislators to discuss clean water and sanitation concerns and encourage protection of our waters and facilitation of clean drinking water. When meeting with these legislators, we should explain how limited access to safe drinking water is affecting those communities and the negative impacts on the healthcare system. We can actively seek to be involved in the decision-making processes surrounding the protection and regulation, supply, and management of water. And we can empower communities by advocating for ways to allow for sustainable practices. For example, building wells, providing clean water containers, providing continual water testing, and incorporation of sanitation facilities, such as toilets.
As Vandana Shiva once said, although 2/3 of our planet is water, we face an acute water shortage. The water crisis is the most pervasive, most severe, and most invisible dimension of the ecological devastation of the earth.